Governor Walz, what can you say about the latest on the Somali fraud that happened under your watch, sir?
Governor, have you been able to apologize yet to the people of Minnesota for allowing this Somali fraud to continue under your watch?
Of the people of Minnesota.
Is it time to apologize? How about the whistleblowers that you have allegedly retaliated against? Would you like to respond to the whistleblowers?
Yeah, well, of course he's not going to answer the question because he can't win on the substance here. There absolutely is an intentional Democrat fraud machine in the state of Minnesota. He is in on it, and the only defense they have is to call Trump a racist, obviously. But anyways, folks, we've long covered this fraud scandal from a number of different angles, whether it's what members of the Somali community in Minneapolis were doing on a widespread scale, or the machine by which Democrats set up to allow it to happen, and in some ways how people like Keith Ellison are even alleged to be receiving kickbacks. But the angle perhaps we've not yet taken is that of how this is actually affecting the Minnesota taxpayers. Because if you want to write off this whole Somali corruption story as just being something that, political corruption, it is what it is, how does it affect my daily life? Let me just say everything, because a scathing new report out today details just how much Minnesota taxpayers are being forced to finance the cleanup effort for this fraud. So, of course, it's very ironic because Democrats tell you, hey, if you vote for us, you'll have more funding for education and social programs, right? That's what liberalism is all about. But no, in reality, you wonder why you always vote for Democrats and it feels like things get worse. It feels like all the public services they claim they're going to give you never actually come to fruition. Gee, maybe it's because on one hand, they're embezzling the money. And then as you'll find out in today's story, the state government, through your tax dollars, is being forced to spend more money to retrieve the money that at least gets caught with the fraud, of course, not counting what we don't catch. That's on one hand. Secondly, though, it turns out as well that Minnesota may further be set to lose up to $30 million in federal funding after Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy recently did an audit to find out that at least 1/3 of all CDL commercial trucking driving licenses in the state of Minnesota are actually illegal. That is right. So, thus far the story's been what? A lot of housing fraud, welfare fraud, COVID stimulus fraud. But it turns out even in the trucking, it's the same exact story. It's almost like, one could basically say that Minnesota is a fraud haven. You know how you have tax havens where you go to hide your money or avoid paying income tax? Well, I guess if you want a state where you can go and just embezzle money from the government, set up a fake nonprofit, just say you're Somali, identify in a certain way, then clearly you can get away with stealing hundreds of millions of dollars. But anyways, we'll bring you these stories here today, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work. It also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And with that said, so we got a pretty damning article here today from Fox that explains how Minnesota's anti-fraud spending has quietly ballooned, leaving taxpayers to pay for the failure twice. What do they mean by that? Well, when the government sends out a grant or, some type of nonprofit thing to house children, feed families, do whatever, COVID stimulus, vaccines, all these different stories that you heard about, right? That, on one hand, obviously is paid out by Tim Walz and the state government, but that comes from who? The taxpayers. But then, right, after a system that we've all established is intentionally designed for fraud, okay, Tim Walz has cracked down on whistleblowers. He's made it extremely easy, basically intentionally, for this to happen. Then the second time around, when it gets caught in the rare cases that it does, it further costs the taxpayer more money to go and retrieve and resolve and all the legal drama, as you could imagine, than it would simply to not have a system that is so ripe for fraud. But all right, take a listen here, because I guess this is quietly the cleanup effort that the Walz government is trying to make. And guess who's on the foot for it, right? Guess who has to foot the bill there? It's not Tim Walz. It's, of course, the Minnesota taxpayer. All right, here we go. In the wake of a years-long $250 million welfare fraud scheme, Minnesota taxpayers will now have to finance a pricey state-level cleanup effort, effectively paying for the failure twice after state officials intentionally, I would argue, right, missed repeated warning signs. As one example, the Feeding Our Future scheme had exploited a federally funded children's nutrition program administered by the Minnesota Department of Education during COVID-19. Now, this is the biggest fraud scandal we know about, right? Feeding Our Future. But take a listen. An audit from the Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor sheds light on how the scheme went unchecked for so long. Yeah, we wonder why, guys. That's, again, such a big mystery. I mean, at the same time when this is happening, you have all these Democrat politicians saying that, oh, any attacks against the Somali community or Somali businesses are racist. We just talked about that in the last video on Minnesota. And then it comes out years later, oh, that business that the Democrats were defending was committing fraud. I'm just going to make the point one more time. When you look, for instance, at the Italian mafia in the Northeast back in the 1900s, it's the same type of situation here, okay? They can play dumb all they want. There is absolutely no way on such a massive, widespread level this type of stuff, this money laundering, this fraud, this embezzlement could be happening. And the local politicians, A, don't know, and B, likely are not getting kickbacks. It always works this way, right? When you have a system that is this widespread and this, deeply built in, it's a fraud machine. Of course, the politicians know. And that's, by the way, why they get so defensive, right? They can give all the speeches they want about, don't attack the Somalis, that's racist. But you ever actually grill them? What happens? Tim Walz walks away. He has no answer for it. Because, again, the Democrat Party is a criminal organization. What else do I have to say for it, right? It's very similar to, that restaurant that has the, backroom poker table or something like that. Or they just seem like a front business because the owner is very rich, but there's never anyone in there. They're money laundering. Same thing with the Democrat Party, right? You could argue to a degree, all the political stuff is just the front, right? Wokeism, liberalism, healthcare, whatever. Behind the scenes, right? That's just the front business for the real business, which is massive fraud and embezzlement, which is exactly what you're seeing here. It's a mafia, folks. Anyways, the deception was so egregious that flawed applications had sailed through. Complaints were never investigated. Again, I wonder why. And the nonprofit kept expanding despite the repeated red flags. Gee, you don't say. What followed was a taxpayer-funded spending spree. So the Feeding Our Families people here, the Somalis, right, spend it on things like luxury vehicles, overseas cash transfers, which we've established likely ended up in the hands of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab, and real estate transactions that prosecutors say may never fully be recovered. And that's true, right? Because once the money goes in real estate, how exactly do you do that? A large share of the $250 million stolen may be gone for good, a loss that Minnesotans will ultimately bear. Well, of course, that's how Democrats treat your money. But here's the second part of it, right? What happened with Feeding Our Future was a travesty, a coordinated brazen abuse, as you well know. But in the wake of the audit exposing the sweeping fraud schemes, this person right here outlined a slate of internal reforms over at the Minnesota DE, right? Jet said that it has deployed a broad set of anti-fraud tools, an expansion of oversight that will almost certainly come with additional costs for taxpayers. Oh, gee, you don't say. So, they basically, here's what's going on. The Democrats are allowing the fraud. They're probably engaging in it themselves. And then when you turn around as a concerned citizen and say, hey, can you actually fix the situation here? They say, sure, no problem. That'll be more money for you. Oh, we can't recover the original money, by the way, conveniently, but please, raise the taxes. Keep raising the taxes so that we can clean up our own mess. Utterly ridiculous. But these new offices and these scaled up compliance infrastructure, which, by the way, I'm going to take a wild guess, I don't think will still catch the fraud for obvious reasons, are going to require ongoing funding to cover salaries, training, and day-to-day operations. This is how Democrats operate, by the way. Have you ever noticed this, right? Anytime they say they're going to fix an issue, it's never that straightforward. It's like, oh, we got to do the permits. We got to hire the contractors. Let's give this grant out. Let's do this research study first. It's this big, long bureaucratic process, and it seems inefficient on the surface. But I think when you examine the issue deeply, it's like, oh, wait a minute. A bunch of people are getting kickbacks, aren't they? Because when the permitting process has to go through, who's taking a share of that revenue, right? When they're paying contractors, which contractors are they choosing? You know what I mean? And then by the end of it, every single time you wonder why government projects, especially in blue states, go way over budget. This is the reason why. As I said, a criminal organization, this is the political party. Now, they've yet to specify the cost of these anti-fraud measures, and the state has not yet released a price estimate, but yeah, you could probably get an idea. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has signed an executive order in January that centralized the state's fraud investigations under the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So in other words, this is him trying to cover his own tracks, but a move, of course, that is slated to cost taxpayers $54 million from 2026 to 2029. By the way, I don't know if you've heard these stories as of late, but many Democrat states, actually most of them, are dealing with severe budgetary shortfalls, right? They're talking about raising taxes. How do we fund all this stuff? You know, we're running out of money. They're blaming Trump for some odd reason, as if he's the reason you can't balance the state budget. They're saying, oh, the federal government stopped sending us money, which is actually not true. No, what's happening is the COVID stimulus money that you were all spending like drunken sailors has dried up. And when you were spending it on like, you know, endless programs, oh, this BS DEI education grant or free healthcare for illegals. And then like 2 years later when COVID is done, you're like, oh, we don't have the money anymore, so let's raise the taxes on people. It's like, no. The reason that Democrat states are facing budgetary shortfalls should be extremely straightforward. But anyways, there you have that story on one hand. I do also want to tell you about this brand new development just this month out of Minnesota, where the fraud's just continuing, right? You thought this was just the scheme of welfare or Medicare fraud, whatever. It turns out as well, an investigation here by the Department of Transportation has just found that over a third of all CDL licenses in Minnesota are illegal. Sean Duffy has announced Minnesota will have 30 days to comply, or $30 million in federal funding will be frozen. So here's even more money that won't go to the state because of the incompetence of Tim Walz, but he absolutely did do it all himself. Actually, I shouldn't use the word incompetence, but you know what I mean.
Tonight, we've learned the Minnesota Department of Vehicle Services has paused issuing certain commercial driver's licenses. And it comes after federal officials say a review found 1/3 of CDLs in the state were issued illegally to people who should not be behind the wheel.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is giving Minnesota 30 days to revoke problematic licenses and threatens to withhold $30 million in federal funding.
Do these allegations surprise you?
There's been fraud in our industry for decades. So it's nothing new to me that there's allegations of fraud. It's nothing new to me that there's unsafe drivers out there.
Federal officials threatened to withhold more than $30 million in federal highway funding after finding issues with commercial driver's licenses.
What we found is there have been states that have issued commercial driver's license to foreigners, and they've gone through sham schools, and they're not safe on American roadways.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says a third of commercial driver's licenses in Minnesota were issued illegally due to an invalid work permit or the state never verified a driver's immigration status.
Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota gave 33% of these licenses unlawfully. People that should never have a driver's license driving a big rig on American roads, endangering the American people. Shameful.
Governor Walz fired back.
As far as the DOT on commercial driver's licenses, we follow the laws we always have. No different than any other state. We've been notified of it. We looked at it. My statement on this is we are following the law exactly as it's written, exactly as we implemented it for decades.
Oh, really? Are you, Tim Walz? You're following the law, right? Just as you were taking fraud very seriously and you said, oh, I take great pride in arresting the fraudsters, while, of course, you did nothing. You systemically, and the track record is there, made it easier for them to commit fraud. It was the federal government entirely who had to step in and do all the work. But sure, I'm totally believing the fact that just a mere coincidence that a 1/3 of all the commercial driving licenses you were giving out were fraudulent, you know? Is that like the feeding our futures thing? Is that just a result? What was your excuse last time? Oh, you know, the COVID money got sent out too fast. Okay, does the CDL stand for COVID driving license or something, Tim? Give me a freaking break. Like, I know maybe it's argumentatively lazy to just say he's full of crap and he's lying and not give a further explanation. But when it comes to Tim Walz, that is actually the case, okay? We saw already the fraud scheme. We learned all about it. It's not very much of a stretch or a huge gamble, you know? I'm not like throwing far away at the dartboard here to say, yeah, Tim Walz is probably lying about this as well, okay? Actions speak for themselves. Your past record speaks for itself. But, you know, feel free to believe him if you want. Yeah, totally. He's following the law, guys, just like he's done the million times before. Okay, but anyways, there is a great opinion piece by Jason Rantz that I think accurately describes exactly what is going on in Minnesota in a very poetic way. So I'll read a bit from that here. It goes on to state here, it's jaw-dropping but not surprising. And this all happened because Democrats built a system practically engineered for abuse by the nonprofit industrial complex, referring to the Feeding Our Future scandal, which is true, right? Engineered for abuse on purpose. I wonder why that is. By the way, I wonder who a lot of those illegal CDLs in the Minnesota area are being handed out to. It's just a big mystery, much like the nonprofit industrial complex, right? Who's committing the fraud, guys? We know. Here are the 5 reasons this fraud was so easy to commit and why the same conditions exist in states across the country. So number 1, Democrats built programs with almost no guardrails by design. So it's easy to blame COVID chaos for what unfolded in Minnesota, but the fraud was not subtle. COVID-19 simply provided the political cover to dump hundreds of millions of dollars onto a broken, low oversight system. And isn't it so telling too, by the way? You know, if you live in a Democrat state, usually, as people know, right, and you're trying to do something actually honest in society, like, hey, set up a small business. You want to open a restaurant? Or you want to just, I don't know, make a home improvement or something like that? It's going to cost thousands of dollars, a bunch of permits. There's all these taxes you got to pay. They make it as difficult as possible, okay? And that inspector's going to come in and he's going to give you the hardest time that he possibly can. But of course, when it comes to, say, just committing fraud, right, that's what Democrats make really easy to do in the state. You know, so there's this kind of big myth. I would say the big lie is that, oh, like Republicans are simply the party of deregulation, Democrats are the party of regulation. No. That's a little bit of a simplistic way to look at it. Republicans are for deregulation on like honest actual businesses. You understand? And Democrats are just on deregulation for the fraudsters, for the criminal third worlders, the illegal aliens. Anyways, according to DOJ indictments, the perpetrators' lies were ludicrous. One defendant, Abba Rashidul, claimed his site in Pelican Rapids was serving 6,000 meals a day, 7 days a week. The entire population, children and adults of Pelican Rapids, is less than 2,500. So that's a very basic, like, hey, the math doesn't math there, right? No, Tim Walz didn't care. Wonder why, by the way. Similar to the whole situation on Snap right now, right? So notice they claim there, oh, we're fixing the situation, we're cleaning up the fraud. No, even right now on the Snap debate, when we're trying to say, hey, let's make requirements more stringent, let's audit stuff, let's review stuff. What did we just talk about earlier in the week, folks? That Democrat states don't want to share their data with us in terms of who is on Snap. So very tellingly, it's the same situation here. I'm sure they made the excuse back then, oh, but they're feeding hungry kids, so who cares if it's fraudulent? Who cares if they're not doing it? Don't you care about the kids? Same excuse they make on Snap. They say, sure, there might be fraud, but we don't want people to go hungry because the government's investigating it. Very convenient how, again, you see the same excuses for fraud, abuse, and crime over and over again. But anyways, you know, you have that. This level of cartoonish fraud was only possible because state agencies rubber stamped the reimbursements. The priority was not accuracy. It was speed and political optics. So, you know, I'm sure you know that situation. The minute a program is tied to a specific vulnerable community, in this case being the Somalis, Democrats in power lose the nerve for a genuine audit, fearing a PC backlash more than losing taxpayer dollars, which is certainly true, but it's not just about a PC backlash. It's about the fact, on one hand, as we established, it's pretty clear to me that many different state legislators in Minnesota are getting kickbacks from the Somali fraud. We'll say that on one hand. We've talked about that a couple of times. But secondly, right, it's about the political backlash specifically from the Somali community. And maybe that's the anti-PC thing to say, but whatever's going on in there is a culture of widespread fraud, because these very people, for instance, who are setting up these nonprofits are likely respected members in the community. And so when Democrats give them all this money, they're like, yay, go vote for Democrats. And then that's a bunch of free votes. But of course, if they did the opposite, if they started investigating, then what would those local leaders likely do? Turn the Somali community against the Democrat Party, right? So that's what's really going on here. It's a political machine, you know, to win the Somali vote, and it's based on fraud. By the way, again, I'm going to go back to New York and those situations, you know, back in the 1900s, very similar to the political machines of back then. You know, the halls where they would basically get a bunch of different immigrants to go vote based on, hey, here's this promise to your community, that same situation. And in many cases, much like you see today, back then even, Democrat politicians were, of course, making a lot of money based on the fraud that was being committed here. But anyways, Minnesota officials, as you know as well, were accused of racism if they questioned the obviously fake claims. Feeding Our Future advocates, we covered that too, by the way, figured that out early and used it as a shield, accusing officials of discrimination the moment that anyone asked why the numbers didn't add up. Yeah, well, that is very easy to do in the Democrat Party and the left-wing worldview. But again, here, guys, we say, right? What's the point I've been making lately? Are we sure the Democrat Party is actually a political entity, or is it all a front for crime? Notice how kind of the rabbit hole here, or the logical path of these events, always points in a certain direction, right? On the surface, they mask it with woke politics. Oh, if you question what these Somali businesses are doing, you're just being a racist. You're just targeting them because they're Somali. So people say, oh, the woke, the DEI, whatever. But behind the curtain, what's really going on? It's not about racism or anything. It's about they're committing crime, and the woke politics is just a convenient front organization for what's going on in the back door, right? Understand? So this is a question I asked in a prior video, but I want you to keep thinking to this to yourselves. Does the Democrat Party actually have an ideology? Is leftism even real? Or is this all a fake construction basically set up to embezzle a bunch of money, give it to a bunch of third worlders, and ultimately operate as a mafia-style criminal organization? Because the more you look at it, the more it seems like that's the case, right? Same thing with crime policy, by the way, in terms of like street crime. On the surface, of course, they tell us that, oh, we need to give people a second chance. Let's break down systemic racism, restorative justice. That's why the repeat offender needs to be let out of jail. So is that the actual reason you're letting them out of jail? Or is it because, again, that's a convenient excuse to side with the criminals, right? Convenient excuse to help the criminals in life. I wonder the real reason you're actually doing that. I'm just saying, something to think about. But anyways, lastly here, he goes on to point out the nonprofit industrial complex. That is certainly something, by the way, we've talked about the Democrat Party absolutely thrives on. No one in government pays the price for failure, so the failures don't stop. That's absolutely true too, by the way, Tim Walz at the end of this, as much as we want to hype it up, do you really think anything's going to happen to him? No. The No Kings protesters will still vote because they'll say, fraud is good. Fraud is good. We certainly know how the Somali community in Minnesota is going to vote, so it is what it is. But that said, okay, going back to the central theory I keep on having, isn't it very telling to you that Tim Walz can only respond to this whole issue by basically saying to President Trump, stop being racist and stop calling me mean names?
True. This creates danger. And I'll tell you what, in my time on this, I'd never seen this before. People driving by my house and using the R word in front of people. This is shameful. And I have yet to see an elected official, a Republican elected official, say, you're right, that's shameful. He should not say it. So look, I'm worried. We know how these things go. They start with taunts, they turn to violence. So deeply concerned.
Okay. Well, first of all, it goes without saying we do condemn actual political violence, unlike your own political party, right? Apparently all the things he said about Trump and Doge and Elon Musk, that's all fine, but Trump called me the R word. But let me say about that issue, actually being called that name is a very good alibi for you, Tim. I'm serious. You should be happy about it. Because the idea that you're too mentally challenged or incapable of just understanding what's happening is a much better front excuse than the alternative, which is you intentionally allowed a bunch of fraud, likely because you're in on it. So which one do you want to go down here, Tim, right? You're just too dumb and something's wrong. Oh no, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to be the governor. Or do you want us to believe actually you consciously are totally in control of all of your own decisions and therefore you're a total freaking scumbag criminal? Pick your poison. I don't know. It's up to you, dude, right? Secondly, of course, I don't even know what he's talking about because I never in my life, I don't think any normal person in their life has ever thought about committing violence against a disabled person. Like who does that? Do Democrats? I guess Democrats do that. But Tim, we're not trying to incite violence by calling you that. Okay, just understand. We're actually helping you. It's a very nice thing to be called as compared to what the alternative would be from this fraud scandal. Just something to think about, right? But anyways, as you can clearly see, much like when all of this fraud stuff was first being investigated, Democrats are still resorting to the same excuses, okay? They can't defend what they're doing. They know they're guilty, and so what do they resort to? You're racist, or you're calling me mean names. Yeah, we've seen the same playbook over and over again, guys. I'm not exactly sure how effective that is. How about you actually respond to the allegations? How about you be honest about what's happening? Oh, no, you don't. You run away, or you just lie about it. You take credit for indictments that you didn't bring down, many such cases. But anyways, that said, let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.